Okay, are you ready to start? Okay, I think we can kick off. Good morning, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to Tom and James from the IAASB. And I saw, Tom, you recognized that Nerea is back, so we're very happy to have Nerea back as well. Welcome back, Nerea. We missed you. We will have Philippe arriving a little bit later this morning, but I think we're ready to kick off. I think it's fair to say we probably need to give a hand of applause. Well done in getting the sustainability standard out, Tom.
Appreciate it. I take that on behalf of the team, and particularly the task force that has been engaged on it. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But first of all, good morning to everyone. I feel like Mark's brought the British weather to Madrid, so thank you, Mark. Actually, for those of us used to hot DC summers, it feels refreshing. You know, we have a little bit of a mix of things that we're talking about today, but I'll give you some context, because I was here at the beginning of July, and since then, a lot has happened. We've completed ISSA 5000, as you just noted. We've approved our technology position. We advanced our going concern project that we're on track for a December approval. We remain firmly on track to approve fraud in March. And we've made significant progress on PI-Track 2, and we'll talk about that today. So this is the topics for this discussion today. I'll focus mainly on 5,000 going concern at PI-Track 2, but I will touch upon the technology initiative and fraud as well. So, you know, when I'm in this group, and since there's been some changeover in the time I've been here, I like to contextualize things and where we are. And I feel like we're really at an inflection point for the board. We're getting to sort of, during my time, the third phase of what we're trying to accomplish. The first phase, you know, the real focus was finishing foundational standards in a timely manner. So that would be ISA 315, the QM project 600, among others. And it really, at that time, was about building a culture and a capacity aimed at greater speed and standard setting responsiveness. The second phase was, now that we've developed this culture aimed at more agility and responsiveness, and that we have more capacity, let's tackle and address the lingering or newly emergent public interest challenges in a way that would be accretive to confidence in the work of auditors and assurance practitioners. So, not surprisingly, LCE, fraud, going concern, 5,000. And it will really get into the point, by March of next year, those projects will be complete. And so we're entering in what I think is a new phase, and thing that will dominate the boards, but not solely occupy everything we do, but in terms of the things that I prioritize and the board prioritizes, is how do we deal with the impact on technology and digitization of audit and assurance services, and what does that mean in key areas such as risk response and audit evidence and quality management. And so I sometimes when we delve into projects, we sort of forget the bigger picture, and I'd like to remind myself, like, what would be the things that we want to accomplish going forward. So I hope that's helpful to contextualize what we're doing. So let's turn to 5,000. So first of all, thank you again for the note of appreciation. As you know, we approved the standard in September, ahead of schedule, and we will shortly deliver the package for certification by the PIOB. I feel confident that we have achieved the following: that the standard is responsive to the public interest issues raised. It aligns with IESBA's position, so the IESBA's future standards on ethics for sustainability will be entirely interoperable with 5000. And maybe most importantly, because it's no use having a standard that's not going to be used, that our standard's well positioned to be adopted and supported globally. Now the completion, the approval of 5000 is not the end of the journey. We need to do the things that we need to do to support the initial adoption. That means getting the relevant materials out there, the guidance and the bases and all of our educational efforts, plus the outreach that's necessary to encourage adoption. On that latter point, there's a role for the PIOB too to encourage adoption. And then also to stand up mechanisms to ensure that we're ready to respond. Remember, a key principle of our drafted is not letting perfect be the enemy of the good. There are things that we will not know in the process, and I'm sure we'll get some implementation challenges in the process, and we have to stand ready to respond. And as you know, we're keeping dedicated capacity at the IAASB for sustainability. So here's the current thinking on dates. Really the big things is once we get past certification is the launch of accompanying materials. The idea is to do that jointly with IESBA following the year anticipated of certification in January. So we have a hub, so to speak, of where people could identify the relevant materials for their assurance needs. The effective date, as you know, is December 15th, 2026. Early adoption is permitted, and we expect a bit of early adoption, both in terms of voluntary practice and jurisdictional. So what I thought would be useful is, since the PIOB has been so helpful to us in thinking through the public interest issues, is not to go into every fine detail on it, but to show how we've been responsive on a few key points. So clearly, you told us to prioritize this. You highlighted the need for timely completion. I think we agree that that's occurred. The engagement, the encouragement that we've gotten on engagement on this, we've launched an unprecedented outreach program on this. It included reaching out to new parties in all continents of the world, or in Antarctica. We had sustainability reference groups that included both accounting practitioners and non-accounting practitioners. And as you know, we've had a robust and transparent consideration of comments, and the basis for conclusions will describe how the comments were addressed. In terms of the scope of the standards, we were asked, not just by you, but by others, to be for profession and framework neutral. We have done that. We're really now focusing on the implementation phase, where we're supporting the use of the standard by non-accountants with enhanced guidance, and that's being worked on right now. The reference groups have been very helpful to us to make sure that the language is as clear as possible, but obviously it's a technical standard. We've really worked on both limited and reasonable assurance and being clear of the differences between the two. I'm not going to go into a great amount of detail on the independence and ethics and quality management stuff, because we do have a coordination session afterwards. But it is important to note there was a bit of at least highlighted that this needs to be addressed. And since that meeting, if you look at agenda paper J1 and J1 revised that was shared with you, we had a very concerted effort and a programmatic approach to getting rid of the differences. And remember, it culminated in the two boards being at a board table together in public session, confirming the alignment. So I think that is a really important step to give people confidence that we're going to have a package of sustainability assurance and ethics standards that work for the marketplace. Groups and works of others, this was probably the most challenging technical issue that we faced. It had maybe the area of greatest enhancement since the exposure draft. We were relatively silent, not completely silent, but relatively silent on groups. We had extensive coordination with IESBA on this topic, but also IOSCO and audit regulators, particularly the CEOB, to come up with a workable solution. One of the key elements is that you'll see a lot of the principles of 600 in the standard, but also making sure that the terminology was aligned, and you'll see this in J1 for the coordination efforts. This was a work, and I feel confident. I met with the IOSCO Sustainability Finance Task Force recently. We've met with C1. They're comfortable about where we landed. What we didn't work on this issue of other practitioners is it to be a loophole to effectively reduce the importance of direction, supervision, and review in the long term. But we recognize in the short term, there may be instances even within a particular network of a firm that direction, supervision, review may not happen. So we provided significant guidance around how that works. On the communication side, this was something that people, in terms of communicating between the auditor and assurance practitioner, we had an element in planning. I think that was to think through where conflicts could occur and to move some of the communication process up front. And then, as you know, we have a required to communicate material inconsistencies or misstatements, the financial statements of if it is other information, so unless prohibited by law. Finally, key audit matters. As you know, we've decided to defer consideration of the inclusion of key audit matters until this standard takes root, get some feedback. Also recognize that key audit matters only exist in reasonable assurance engagements for the audit side. And so that's on our plate. We're not saying that it can't be done. And certainly, assurance practitioners and jurisdictions could enhance the requirements by including some form of key sustainability assurance matters on a voluntary basis. And finally, as you said, the coordination efforts, you see the 7 areas where we eliminated any inconsistencies or concern. So this slide shows you what, as I said, we're not done. The staff doesn't get a full rest. We're standing up guidance for non-accounting assurance practitioners who may not be familiar. This is sort of like our bridging guide. We're doing some guidance on the inherent limitations of sustainability matters. And then we're focusing on some implementation guidance on evidence. So I think this should be useful to the marketplace. These are the areas that people have said that they need the most guidance on. And so this will be released in January, according to the timetable. And here's a little bit more detail about what we'll do and the stakeholder engagement and support. I assume that I'm still on the speaking circuit and others will be as well. So I think we could stop there. Is it worth pausing at this juncture?
Thank you very much, and maybe just a couple of points. We obviously, as we always do, had our preparation session yesterday, and this is not an area that I need to open up for comment. Thank you. I thought it was really comprehensive and very well explained how you dealt with our public interest issues, which we obviously also keep track of. And we do note those 2 public interest issues on key audit matters and two-way communication, and we understand where we are and where you are with that. So we are ready to consider this for certification when you're ready with your suite of documents. Maybe just 2 small points I think in the run up to IESBA also finalizing their standards, and one other one. So the one is, I just think it's really important now to continue, and I know you are doing that continuous coordination, just to make sure that there's that full alignment when it comes to the definitions and so on. And then the other point is, with a new standard like this, there probably will be unintended consequences, and maybe just if you want to just think about it, and you might or might not want to comment now, how you just keep quite, not 3 or 4 years later, you will do the post-implementation review, but just sort of keep things on the radar when there might be unintended consequences, implementation difficulties, and things like that popping up. But that's literally the comments that we have from our side. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you for that. So, yeah, I should have mentioned that we talked about this at our joint meeting, but the idea that we would continue to stay in touch, more than stay in touch, the teams are closely working together, and that the task forces, our task force and their task forces will remain engaged even into the implementation phases. And secondly, on the unintended consequences, it's been very much on my mind too, that we need to keep a monitoring mechanism in the marketplace, the form of which we haven't determined yet. To say that we were so focused on getting the standard up, but I'll come back to you as our thinking evolves in terms of monitoring. Should we turn to pie track 2?
Yes, thank you. You can continue.
Okay, so let me turn to pie track 2. Remember, at the outset, the objective of this project was to enhance the consistency of definitions with IESBA as it relates to listed entity and PI, and to ensure the interoperability of our standards. We already enhanced the transparency requirement in the auditor's part as part of track 1 of this project. The question has been for track 2 is how can we treat the 8 instances of differential requirements which relate to quality management and transparency in ISAs in relation to PIs or listed entities / publicly traded entity. Indeed, I think our board, it has a firm conviction that in the long term, it will be useful to extend these differential requirements to PIs when there is a global baseline in place for the definition of PI in practical terms throughout the world. The question is, how is it best in the public interest to get to that point? And that is really the core of what we've been discussing at the board, particularly in light of the FAQ that was updated recently by IAASB. And so I'll give you a little bit more, which was probably not particularly apparent on the slides, but of our thinking for it. So first of all, like IESBA, none of this is a commentary on IESBA. We take their standard and we've worked closely with them on it, and the construct for their PI standard is a relatively new construct that depends upon jurisdictional adoption. When that was clarified to stakeholders, it caused some questions about whether our proposal was viable, because the IAASB has always taken an approach that you either comply fully with our standards or don't. There was no room for jurisdictional differences in terms of performance criteria. That has always been, our sense, the right place to be to ensure lots of the things that are highlighted as qualitative characteristics of the PIF in terms of understandability, consistency of application and enforceability. And so the clarification issued by IESBA, while it makes a lot of sense, meant that our standard for jurisdictions that haven't adopted the revised IESBA definition of PI would go beyond what IESBA has in their standards. And so we looked at 2 options here. And option 1 really is that is an incremental step to get into our goal about having consistent differential requirements based around a PI baseline. So basically says, for the time being, we switch listed entities to publicly traded entities, and we signal to the public that in a defined period of time to be determined, we'll assess the adoption of the PI definition, and at the point at which a critical mass has been seen, we will consider going back to an approach probably similar to what we have in the exposure draft, where there's a baseline approach to PI throughout the world that's consistent, and extend at that point. So we'll take the incremental step to adopt the publicly traded entity for listed entities and swap that in the near term. Now, option 2 basically would have said, we extend it to PIs as defined by the jurisdiction. This would be a first for us at the board. And it would be a first because it would really depend upon what a jurisdiction has done in relation to PI definition for their purposes. And again, I'm not making a judgment that the construct is wrong on the ethics side. We set standards for different purposes. But in my mind, it could set a very bad precedent for performance requirements in our standards. And it was the unanimous mind of the board, ultimately, that it could set a bad precedent for our standards, because you could envision circumstances in terms of performance requirements where certain jurisdictions or groups of jurisdictions weren't ready for a proposal that we thought was essential for the public interest. And they would have said, okay, make the performance requirements contingent upon our local adoption. And this could happen in a large number of areas, including fraud, going concern. Just think about the transparency requirements that we're proposing. And if that was the case, I feel like we would be down a proverbial slippery slope. And so it was the construct that worried the board in terms of understandability to the user, the implementation of it, and the consistency of it being applied globally. And so we felt it was a better idea in the near term to make the progress with publicly traded entity, and then consider, based upon market data, assuming that there's really strong take-up of the definition, to come back and ultimately extend. And, you know, we're open to suggestions about how we should signal that to the marketplace, but we do strongly have a view that option 2 is not a viable option. And so, obviously, we haven't considered whether this would require re-exposure or not. We don't do re-exposure considerations to the end of the project. But clearly, it's a core element of our due process, this reconsideration. So there are definitely trade-offs here. We will, as I said, we're united in our goal of extension in the near term, but we are also united in not changing the core model for performance requirements in our standards. So would it be useful for me to pause here?
Thank you very much for that, Tom. And I've mentioned to you that we have quite a couple of concerns around that, which I'll share with you just now. I just first want to hand over to Dave, as you know, who was our observer at your meeting, and then I'll sort of try to summarize what our concerns are. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Linda and Tom. Thanks for that description. That was really helpful, especially for somebody who sat through the meeting and read through the materials beforehand. And I said this at the meeting and in our session yesterday, but my sense in reading the board package for the meeting was that it did not clearly describe what you just described. It did not lead the reader to understand, it did not lead this reader, I should say, to understand the implications of option 2. And while it was explained that they were trying to write this in a neutral manner, I think not having that information in there made the discussion among the board members much more difficult to understand for me as I observed the meeting. I would like to add too that while at the end board members unanimously supported option 1, I think they also unanimously were disappointed that they were in that position. And I think that is also important, which makes, depending on where this goes, which makes the communication of the IAASB, I think, really critical, that you know, this isn't the standard that you wanted to, obviously not the standard you wanted to issue because it's not what you exposed. And I think that there's, that communication will be critical. Thanks.
Thank you, Dave. And Tom, maybe a couple of comments to summarize our discussion yesterday. So just going back to your initial exposure draft, and we absolutely agree and take your point that the manner in which you explained and interpreted the PI definition at the time in the exposure draft is not something that you can implement, despite the support in the comment period, is not something that you can implement because there need to be that alignment between the interpretation of the two sets of standards. So we absolutely agree and support that. When it comes to your option 2, and Dave spoke a little bit about that, the manner in which you described it now, I still battle, and I don't think we were clear in our minds when we prepared for this. What do we mean with the jurisdictional differences in the performance requirements, the performance criteria? Because the way in which we understand the PI definition in the IESBA code is jurisdictions can decide which entities should apply the definition, or to which entities the definition applies. In other words, which entities in that jurisdiction are classified as public interest entities and which not. So it's not in our mind so much about how the audit is performed, that you're creating two different ways of performing the audit, is which entities fall into the definition and which entities are out. I do believe there is already those let's call it precedents for that, you know, split between in and out in many jurisdictions. Where I come from, there's a public interest score for private companies, and if you fall below the public interest score, you're not subject to audit. And this is a little bit like that. So we battle a little bit to understand that argument of performance criteria and how that's going to make the audit be different. Because remember, what IESBA has done was also to do a first and try to establish this global definition to at least push some entities up. So I do believe we need to understand that a little bit better, why that option is not viable. And as Dave said, unfortunately, in reviewing the material, it wasn't all that obvious to us. When it comes to option 1 is very different to what was exposed. And I know you said you still need to consider the need for re-exposure, but it's much more limiting to what was originally exposed. So we would strongly ask you to think about the need to re-expose that, and potentially, you know, there is always the opportunity to re-expose both options. So just something for you to think about. I don't think it's something that we need to debate at length here, but I do believe it is something that you need to consider very carefully in the public interest on, firstly, you expose this and now you end up issuing a standard that's much more limited, and secondly, also just fully understanding why option 2, which is aligned with the IESBA definition, is not viable and, as you refer to, a slippery slope. Do you want to come in? Do you want me to take a comment or two? Maybe you want to come in first.
So, Dave, your point around communication is right. And I think we will definitely explain wherever we come to in whatever form, whether it's a final standard in the bases or in a re-exposure. As I said, we just have not considered that. We don't get to re-exposure. We try to walk through the preferred position. So the performance requirements point, and I thought I'll probably repeat largely what I said, because our papers really didn't clarify it, and a lot of the thinking on that was discussed at the board meeting and in the prep to the board meeting. When people read an auditor's report and it says it's issued under international standards for auditing, they know that they followed our standards and the procedure, the requirements, performance requirements of the standards. In this instance, there are 8 areas where the work effort is different based upon currently listed entities versus. Now, if we adopted option 2, it could the work effort will swing no matter wherever the PI definition is, and you won't have that level of consistency about it. And so, from our standpoint, that is not in the public interest in the near term. Again, I state that IESBA's taken the right steps to get a baseline on PI, but we do not want to be driven by choices made at a jurisdictional level about whether someone else's standards are adopted or not. And as I said, there is no reason that jurisdictions would not say to us going forward, limit this performance requirement in the near term until we could adopt it 6 years down the road. We use effective dates for that. We use consideration of other things for it. We may change our actual performance requirements as a result of jurisdictional matters. But I think one of the things we want people to know is that when ICEs are being adopted, they know what the performance requirements are that lead to the issuing of the audit report. And that is what gives us pause. It's really a model question that we're not content with moving towards. And this would be an introduction of a new model to our standards.
Thank you. I don't want us to have a technical debate because that's not our role, but I do think we need to understand that, and we probably need to spend some time to, separately to explain it as we go through the next IAASB meeting. So I won't open the technical debate at all. I would just say, in my understanding, yes, the performance, the work effort is different, but it's enhanced. It's not, there's still the basic one. So I'm going to basically just take everybody's comments. I'll start with Davis, the observer, take everybody's comments, and then let's wrap up on it. But I do think it's very important for us to, not on a technical basis, but just on a public interest basis, understand whether, if that's option 1 and not option 2, whether this is, firstly, not necessary to re-expose, but whether this is really doing justice to the alignment and coordination between the two boards. I'll start here with you, and I'm going to go around, take all the comments, Tom, and then we wrap up on PI definition. Thanks, Dave.
Tom, I just wonder if there's a simple example that might illustrate this, and so I'm going to use CAMS as an example. If, for example, you adopted option 2, and if in a jurisdiction publicly traded entities were not considered PIs, would CAMS not apply in that jurisdiction? Would be the question, and I think that may illustrate, if that's correct, why the board went to option 1.
That's certainly true. Under your example, that would occur. That is one of many unintended consequences from it. Remember, listed entities is, while not perfectly applied throughout the world, it's pretty common. And publicly traded entities, we feel, is a strongly understood enough concept, which expands, in fact, over listed entities because it incorporates other forms of publicly traded debt and equity instruments.
Okay, and thanks, Dave. I think those examples would be quite useful. Thanks, Janine.
Thank you, Tom and Linda. I have actually a question that builds a little bit on Dave's example. Having listened to your explanation, Tom, I'm wondering what this means, option 1, for jurisdictions that have a PI definition which includes PTE, so publicly traded entities, and including, of course, listed entities. If option 1 is the option going forward, because there are these differential requirements, which you also refer to as performance requirements. That's the CAM and other things that apply for PIs then, would apply for, well, or PTEs only. But if you have locally already a PI definition that includes much more than only publicly traded entities, but also non-publicly traded insurance companies, whatever it is, can be many other things. What does it mean for those audits? They're currently already, what do they do? Do they need under ISAs? They've adopted ISAs. Would they then fall back all of a sudden? And what is the difference between option 1 and 2?
Let me take all the questions, please, Tom, in the interest of time. Sandy? Oh, okay, thanks. Sorry, Sandy. Mark?
Yeah, Tom, I absolutely get what you say about there being no room for jurisdictional differences in your standards. But it seems to me the fact remains that you put out an exposure draft with a wider definition of PIs, which your board was obviously very happy with. And as far as I'm aware, there was no significant pushback in comments on that point. And it seems to me that the problematic thing here is the IESBA Q&A. And I think it would look, the optics of the IAASB having a different definition of PI to IESBA would be very bad and wouldn't be in the public interest. I'd like to suggest a potential compromise where you proceed with the definition as set out in your exposure draft, but you do not include in your guidance the IESBA Q&A. So therefore, there would be no jurisdictional difference in the interpretation of PI in the context of the ISAs. Just a suggestion.
Thanks, Mark. Robert?
Thank you, Linda, and thank you, Tom, for the explanation of the position. Certainly, you've made it very clear your approach to the two options in the public interest. I certainly understand what you're saying about the benefits of a transitional approach to this. I think it would be helpful, given what Dave also said about the board pack, which I haven't seen, but I take on trust what Dave has said, that the board pack didn't perhaps articulate this as well as it could, that you perhaps do some further work to articulate the competing public interests that are involved here. So clearly this is a situation where you've got two competing public interests. One is the undoubted public interest in consistent application of the ISAs. There's no doubt about that. But there's also a public interest in enhanced audit effort and performance in relation to particular classes of entities, which go beyond just publicly traded entities, because we were all satisfied with the work that the IESBA did to push out the broader definition for jurisdictional adoption. So I think it's good to see the PIF being used as the basis of the consideration on the slide, but I wonder whether that could be revisited and considered on the basis of those two competing public interests in the way in which that's then presented for further discussion. So just, that's a comment, and then just two questions. The first question in relation to this transitional approach and saying, well, we'll take option one for now and then wait until the benchmark is sufficiently there. The question there is, will there ever be sufficient adoption of the code of ethics and the new PI definition jurisdictionally? Recognising, of course, within that question that the IESBA definition allows for variations jurisdictionally with the top-down, bottom-up approach. And the second question, I guess, is whether there may be some benefit in where you may already be doing this, in engaging with the national standard setting community on this, because it seems to me to be very logical to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Begonia.
Thank you, and thank you, Tom, for the explanations. Well, I do agree with Robert that it seems that we are using public interest in different ways, and well, one is consistency, which is important, consistency with the definition in the IESBA, not the definition, with the Q&A that the IESBA has developed, and the other is the public interest per se. I think the second is more relevant. So having, well, having a definition about PIs that implies that only listed entities or public traded entities are going to be assured following a very strong independence requirements is not enough. We are not changing from the prior situation. So to me, the step that we were trying to achieve, the boards and the PIOB, which is going further and having a more strong definition of PI, is now not happening. So you are again in square one, having the basic definition. So I think we are not going towards the appropriate direction. And in fact, PIOB was even more demanding when we were talking about the PI definition in the past. We wanted to have more types of entities covered by the PI definitions, CIBs, funds, etc. So from the public interest perspective, I think that the position to adopt option one is not a step further at all. It is to go towards, is to go a step back. So, and this is not what the exposure draft suggested. So I think that this is not what should be done from the public interest perspective. Thank you.
Tom, do you want to respond, and then let's wrap up on this point?
First of all, we're not changing or regressing at all on the PI definition. The PI definition is set by IESBA. The question before us is whether that has an impact on differential requirements in the audit standards. We are not changing that. In fact, the step we're taking by going to publicly traded entity actually does expand differential requirements to an added group. And what we're saying is that the PI definition as still applies for independence and ethics requirements. None of that changes from our steps. So we do not believe this is a regression. And I do think there are, as Robert rightly says, there's not, in any situation, a yes or no on the public interest lies here and the public interest doesn't lie there. There's competing factors here. In this case, maybe we have the most clear example where there are significant competing factors. And I take the point that both Robert and Dave have suggested that we need to be very clear on how we've considered those two factors when recognizing what Mark said, that the board's intent over time is to move to differential requirements for PI. Now, Mark, on your suggestion, I just would say, effectively, that would make us an ethics standard setter. We would be requiring, for the purposes of audits, a definition that goes beyond the ethics board's requirements, which were certified by this body. So I don't believe it's for us to determine whether we should reopen the definition of pi. I think IESBA went through an appropriate due process to get to their point. I think it's the right way forward to encourage the adoption of a baseline, and we've set out a path for considering it. So I was asked, I think Robert says, will there ever be sufficient adoption of the standard? I expect so. And the data is that the way I would think about it at our board would be in the jurisdictions adopting ISAs, have the preponderance of those jurisdictions conformed with the IESBA pi definition. And that is something that the data will drive us to. And I think that's particularly an area that we should engage with national standard setters, both on the ethics and audit side, to get a feel for at what point do we get to that tipping point that makes it acceptable. So, and even before we get to that point, clearly, we had a discussion with national standard setters in May on this topic, but we will need to continue to get to that. Now, Janine, you asked a question of, will this mean a falling back? No, I don't think so. Jurisdictions have always topped up our standards. What we were concerned about is variations downwards or side to side from our standards on the performance requirements. But in jurisdictions such as Europe that already extends requirements to PIs, there will be no change. Because if you extend our requirements to PIs in your jurisdiction, you are still in conformity with ISIS. We're just redefining listed entities to publicly traded entities, which brings us into more convergence and conformity with IESBA. So I hope that explains a little bit of our thinking. I understand this is a challenging area. It's a challenging area because, I want to be clear, standard setters, whether it's we or IESBA, want our standards to be adopted. And I'll let Gabriella speak for her board, but my understanding is that the way they set the standard was the best path to ultimately get to a baseline for pi globally, which has not existed. And we are driven by that factor on our differential requirement consideration.
All right, I think I can wrap it up, and maybe just a few confirmations, clarifications. I thought you gave us really sensible and good responses, and a few things. Let me just be very clear that the PIOB would wholly be against you trying to set ethics standards through the back door in the IESBA standards. So absolutely support the comment that you can't be applying your own definition or ignoring portions of the definition. And yes, we rightfully supported the IESBA standard when it was issued. And adoption is important. Adoption is very key to the suite of standards, but the adoption at all costs is not what is ever the objective. It is really to create the appropriate high level, right level standard to move things forward. The pi definition, as said by IESBA, was, however, really a first. And that was to try and create a baseline. There was never before. Everybody, including the PIOB, many years ago, tried to define public interest, and IESBA at the time managed to set a baseline to at least include a little bit more than just at that time listed entities, publicly listed entities into the definition. So yes, there's always room to enlarge it, and IESBA is doing further work on that, but it is important that there's an alignment in your interpretation of the definition. So we absolutely take that point, and we are by no means suggesting you come up with your own definition, and we certainly also by no means suggesting that this is a step backwards. All of this is a very significant greenfields step forward. Two things that's my takeaway maybe for going forward for your borders, and you mentioned it in your closing, in your comments, is it would be really useful to understand the trade-offs between the public interest framework criteria, and you're right, those are trade-offs. In some instances, you actually cannot achieve all of them, and maybe the right answer is, in this case, the one and not the other. And Robert's suggestion on how you explain that a little bit better would be really useful, linked with Dave's suggestion on some examples of, if we take this criteria, if we meet this criteria and not the other one, what the potential unintended consequences will be. So we don't want to push you into that place that you so often say is let perfection be the enemy of good. It is important to move things forward, but I do think it's really important that there's clarity. So thank you. We're looking forward to seeing how we can hopefully conclude this in December.
Okay, thank you for that. That was really good advice, which we will definitely account for going into our December meeting. Let me turn to going concern. This has been a topic that we've had discussions on at our board preceding my time, but I'm happily reporting that we're all systems go for approval in December. I'm confident that we're going to have a robust proposal that will achieve universal respect, if not support, because obviously there's not universal support for anything we do, but I think people will think of us as a robustly developed standard that accounted for the various levels of feedback. And we haven't stopped our external engagement so far. We've been meeting with reported standard setters, the IAASB and IESBA, on a regular basis. We wrote to the IASB, as you know, reflected some of the discussions we've had at this table. It's been acknowledged. I don't expect any IASB action by the time we issue our standard. However, they do acknowledge that our standard is consistent with IFRS's, so that's a positive. We've continued our outreach with the investor community on the options, particularly around transparency that's being proposed. We had a specific engagement with prudential regulators since we met last, and that's particularly in relation to communications issues, conscious of potential financial stability concerns that could come out with an adverse conclusion on going concern. So that is all occurring. I'll give it the same type of sense. I won't go into all the detail because I'm conscious of time, but if you see the slide deck, we are remaining very responsive to your public interest issues. I think that the key takeaway is that we haven't withdrawn from the core principles that were in our exposure draft on many of the important elements: timeline, the evaluation of management's assessment of going concern, that we clarified what management's expected to do and what the auditor's expected to do, recognizing those roles and responsibilities. Our communication in the auditor's report, despite some desire to move the discussion to CAMS, we have resisted that. We're continuing to have things in a self-contained section on going concern. And as I said, I talked about communication with appropriate parties. I'm going to take this as read, if we want to get to other topics, but I'm happy to take any comments to you. As I said, we're expecting December approval. We continue to have outreach as we get to finality on the standard before approval. And certainly, I'm really optimistic that this will provide a real upgrade over the existing going concern standard.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Dave first, and then I'll share some of the thoughts that came out of our preparation session. Thanks, Dave.
Tom, I was just going to ask if, I thought it was really useful at the board meeting that there was one section where the board considered a sample audit report with both the transparency disclosures from going concern and fraud in them, and I thought it would be great to hear kind of your sense of the feedback that the board gave you on that.
Thanks, Dave. So we've had anytime we touch the auditor's report, people seem to get a little antsy. My personal point of view, and largely the board's point of view, is that communicating the auditor's report is really important, because it's the one place that the auditor communicates with the external parties and shows the importance and relevance of his or her work. And so what we wanted to prove is that the disclosures that were added for fraud and going concern are workable together without making the auditor's report a mess. And I think the conclusion of the board was they are workable. It doesn't add undue confusing paragraphs to the auditor's report. And there was the usual discussion of boilerplate, but I remind people that we don't draft the auditor's report. It's for the auditor to not draft boilerplate. So that's where we landed. I felt like it was a good example and a good exercise, and it proved that what we're proposing on both sides work together and will be helpful.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Dave, and thanks, Tom. And Tom, as you know, both fraud and going concern, seeing that Dave mentioned fraud too, have been projects that were always very high on the PIOB agenda ever since I can remember. We've been very comfortable to see how things moved forward and how you progressed both of these sets of standards. We don't have outstanding issues. We do believe it's going to make a difference. The one comment, and I'm going to put Sandy on the spot because she made it in our preparation, and is that this is really significant and it's really pushing things forward, and it's potentially giving a lot of very useful information for readers of audit reports, most pertinently the investor community. And we would urge you to think very carefully how you make sure that you also advertise this, that you make sure that people on the other side of the audit report that read it actually see the benefit. Because yes, they might read the audit report. Hopefully when people see this longer audit report, because there's a fraud and a going concern issue, they will think maybe I should be reading it. But there's probably some additional communication work to be done. So Sandy, I'll just hand over to you. You're much more eloquent than I am in explaining how it's necessary for investors to understand this benefit that they're getting out of this work.
Yeah, my comment came in the context of both sustainability and then going concern and fraud together, because they'll change the audit opinion over the financial statements. And really, it was about when this is issued, will there be something that explains it in non-audit terms to investors? And so they understand what the problem was and what has been solved or not solved by that. In the context of going concern, really, it also includes looking at the difference between this requirement and the IASB, actually, right? But it's an entirety of a different set of language of looking at it not from how the sausage was made, which is what we do, but looking at it from the perspective of what do you receive and what's changed and why should it matter to you. And many people talk about the expectations gap, particularly when it comes to fraud. But part of the expectations gap is just really explaining what investors should expect. And so marketing and communication around that. So it was that comment in the context of going concern and fraud, but also in the context of sustainability, and why I had my card up earlier, was that the next steps all include much of implementation guidance, and that's for people who are going to implement the standard, not necessarily people who are going to use the report. And ironically, after the conversation yesterday, one of my colleagues in a different part of the world had just done a roundtable, and the number one item on the going forward was people don't understand limited versus reasonable assurance, and this was a group of investors, right? So there needs to be some communication, not starting from how the sausage was made on the sustainability standard, but this is what a report's going to look like, and here's how it's different from an audit report, because that's what they know. And so I think that is, that communication is important, not just for using these particular standards or their issuance, but for understanding what the IAASB and IESBA do and the PIOB does for the investor community. And I think that's particularly true in the context of sustainability, because they'll see these reports. I mean, they've seen them before. Mostly it's on scope 3, but relative to particularly the ESRSs, so.
I think that's good advice. It's, I assume we're going to do that, but your points are well taken.
Thank you, Tom. Tom, we've dealt with the focus areas. There's one other topic where we might want to make a few comments, but I just first want to check if there's anything else from your side that we need to discuss.
Well, the reason why fraud isn't on the agenda today is that we've only gotten through the top 4 issues, big ones, in terms of a redeliberation, and we thought that it would probably be more suited for a later discussion. But to say that they're on track and we're staying pretty true to the intent of our proposals right now. There's no backtracking on it, which I know is, from a public interest perspective, would be one of the big concerns, because we were pretty well aligned on the public interest issues so far. The technology position is also approved. It's on the website. It's really important, and people may say, oh, what does this really do? Just a reminder, our board wasn't committed to write in requirements that specifically reference technology or were impacted by technology. So this is a gated issue in many ways, and it's a signal to the world that we are going to actively consider the impact of technology in terms of the reporting entity's use of technology, the auditor's use of technology, and its implications for quality management going forward. And so this is now feeding into our integrated project proposal for 500, 330, 520. But in my mind, it also could feed into what we do on QM. If you know ISQM1, it has one paragraph as it relates to technological tools. There may be a hook there for doing more work. And by the way, it doesn't always require new standards or new requirements. There may be other tools in our standard setting toolkit, such as guidance and other implementation activities as well. And so we'll have a thoughtful consideration. But this is really sort of the opening of a gate for a more forward way to think about technology in ISAs and QMs going forward.
Thank you, Tom. Just on fraud, we got the same feedback, positive feedback from Dave as our observer and from our observation staff. So we're looking forward to that. If I'm not mistaken, the intention is to approve that in March. And then on technology, that was the one other area where we had a couple of comments noting that you've issued the position paper, which we obviously support. We've spoken about that before, that in thinking about other standards that you're working on changing, amending, that you really start embedding the technology aspect into all of those standards. So certainly an important step forward to create that discipline to do it, which we support. We were wondering, and you might actually have touched on that, but maybe you want to just specifically respond, whether that is the end of it. You said it's the opening of a gate to start thinking about technology. So we were wondering, will there potentially be some specific standards on technology? If we look at what the PCAOB is doing, they seem to be focusing on a couple of specific things. Not that we're saying that's necessarily what you have to do, but do you envisage that down the line, there might be specific standards that deal with specific aspects of technology, AI in the audit, etc. And the other point that that came up when we prepared is just our understanding of this is also an area, I would imagine, where there's a level of coordination between yourselves and IESBA. It might be very different, but there is also potentially the need for coordination, which we can discuss in the session with Gabriella just now as well, but maybe just a few comments from your side. Thank you.
So whether we have a specific standard related to one particular technological aspect or not is not determined. I would think probably the area most likely to see that first would be in the QM side. We're more likely to embed it in the audit principles that we already have. So 330, 500, could be 200, could be 220. But we haven't decided exactly. In terms of the near-term focus, it's really about what we need to do on 500 and 330 and 520. You know, confirmations is another clear area where technology plays a role. And the standard was drafted probably long before APIs were even part of modern lexicon. So, my sense is that we're likely more often than not to incorporate it in the existing audit principles, but I don't want to preclude anything on that. And remember, going back to my initial comment, the impact of this technology statement will now be felt in this third phase. This is the real focus. Once we effectively clear the decks of what we have on the work plan by March, this is what's going to preoccupy this board for the next 3 years, and probably won't in the future.
Thank you.
And there's definitely coordination, but I should have said this. Our technology, we have a technology team. They speak to IESBA's technology team. Active coordination as we do on everything else.
Good, thank you very much. I'm going to take the last round of comments. I've got 2 cards, and then I'm going to wrap it up and invite Gabriella to join us. So Sandy first, and then Janine.
Yeah, my comment was really just to laud you for the technology position. One of my colleagues forwarded it along to me and said, isn't this what we've been asking another standard setter to do? So it wasn't you, but it was kind of humorous because it was. But I think it's also important in every decision that's taken. So you talked about the audit, the length of the audit report, right? The analysis of technology we've wanted as investors is to consider that in the cost-benefit analysis. So it's not really that long when something can read it a machine can read it very fast, for example, right? So it needs to permeate the way of thinking about how, not only how the audit is done, but how the audit and the work is consumed, so.
Thanks, Andy. We're not in competition with other standard setters, but I'm happy to hear that people are pleased that we've issued something.
Janine?
Thank you. Yes, thanks. Tom, I'm very happy to read that the position paper, or the technology position paper, starts with acknowledging how technology could contribute to audit quality, enhancing audit quality, and that you want to actually encourage the use of technology by firms and practitioners. My question is, you just explained how you see that, which standards would be the usual suspects to include technology in there, but are the standards as such the place then to, if you talk also about encouragement of using technology, how do you see that? Would that be through the standards, or would it be something else?
I think the standards are actually a pretty good place to start. We have this digital advisory group. We have a couple of entrepreneurs on the group. And in fact, there's a sense always that too much standardization could limit innovation. And his point was quite the contrary. by actually being bold about what you put in a standard, allows people to innovate around the rules. And potentially, one of the things that we've heard that inhibits the use of technology is the concern of lack of acceptance of outputs by the regulatory community. And so I do think the standards are, I'm probably more pro this than other members of our board. We haven't really worked through all the specifics, but I do think the standards are the right place to begin.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you very much, Tom and James, for the session. Thank you, everybody, for your contribution. We wish you well. There's a lot of work. There's a big chunk of work completed now, but there's always a lot of work ahead. So good luck with all of that. I'm going to ask Gabriella to come and join us, and then we're just going to spend a little bit of time to talk about coordination. Thanks.
While we're conscious of your time and the desire of people probably to get to coffee break, should we just start like this?
Let's just wait a minute. One or two people slipped out.
Yeah.
And we are slightly ahead of time. Okay, I think we can start. I just want to double check that the slides have been put up. Thanks, Rothio. Okay, now we can start. Thank you very much and welcome, Gabriella. It's good to have you here. Thank you very much. We also have Ken online and we've got the slides put up. This has been a really important topic for us, that there's coordination, especially when it comes to sustainability. We want to recognize the significant work and leadership that the two of you have taken to really drive this and make sure that there's alignment. There's also a really good document in our pack that explains how the definitions work between the two boards and the level of alignment and so on. So thank you for putting all of that together. I'm going to hand over to the two of you. I'm not sure which one of you will be talking to the, is it Tom draw, the short straw this time? Tom, over to you.
Like with everything, this is a joint effort. So I'll start, and Gabriella will finish. But throughout the whole project, both boards were committed to getting to and interoperable and converged solutions, particularly on many of the topics that were in the public interest issues. And as we know, that the challenge is that the slightly different timetables of the two boards. So at least from the IAASB's perspective, we want to really thank IESBA for their accelerated consideration of these issues while they were in their first wave of consideration of the comments that they received. So it was really an unlocking issue. I may have sounded sanguine about these issues previously because I knew with a good process and goodwill and good proper intent that we would get to good conclusions. And I think that's where we got to on these 7 issues, where there were potentials or concerns about misalignment or not perfect alignment. And we put together a very structured process. And there had always been engagement between the two boards and the staff teams on a regular basis, the task forces, but it was the focused effort from June onwards that led to our joint board session and what you see in agenda item J1 that we submitted to you, that we revised, and you see it in track changes because there was one issue, one area for the purpose of clarity and simplification that we made further amendments to. So you see what the latest board thinking was on this. Since our last meeting, we had joint coordinations. There was a coordination meeting that Gabriella and I helped convene in London with the task force chairs of the staff teams, which really accelerated the movement. And then just the extraordinary efforts of the two teams and the task force chairs to get this done, which culminated, as I said, in our joint session, where I think we were able to say unequivocally that we are aligned. And so I think this is a real success for coordination. It's a success that, in terms of the commitment that we show as boards to reaching converged outcomes. And I'm proud of where we are. So let me turn over to Gabriella about some of the learnings that we've experienced.
Thank you, Tom. First of all, good morning to all of you, and thank you for having us. And it's, again, a pleasure to be here and have the opportunity to connect with the PIOB and understand what is keeping the PIOB awake at night and what should keep us awake at night. So thank you, Tom, for this introduction. Well, I think it's important, we think it's important, it would be important to summarize some of the learnings of this intense process of coordination over a very hot summer. And there are actually some lessons to be taken, and I think that the first one, even if it's not evident in this slide, is that for the future we will have to take care of these issues of coordination earlier on in the process. And I was listening to you, Linda, asking about coordination on technology. It's already happening because, as you know, IESBA already has some materials and etc. But I think that this is the most important takeaway and learning, that we will have to start earlier on, and when we start any project, we need to address any possible coordination needs from the start and not at the end of the process. This was challenging. As Tom said, I'm also proud of where we are now, and this is the result of a significant effort of the teams, the task forces, and the board as well, because they were asked over the summer to provide input and to react and etc. So this is the first and more important learning, but also that from the start we are clear about where we want to go, what are our common goals and our common purposes and outcomes. So this is not always an easy exercise, because we are not one and the same. We have different purposes, or the ultimate purpose is the same, but we cover different areas, have a different remit and mandate and etc. So common goals and common outcomes, it's not always easy to define, but I think this is something that for the future we will need to discuss upfront, and as much as possible, and when possible, set these common goals and purposes. The fact that Tom and I were involved in this process was, I think, determinant, and I'm thinking, for instance, about the London meeting, the meeting that we had in London, where I think this was, it was important that we were there. Of course, the the biggest piece of this cake, we owe it to the staff, which made an incredible effort, but of course there is a different perspective and a different high level and strategic perspective that sometimes has to be provided. So for the future, we also learned that sometimes, not always, because otherwise we will be micromanaging our teams, but this strategic approach at the start and at the critical point of decisions is also important. Another lesson is that, and I really mean what I'm going to say, is that the very different or diversified perspectives of the two boards at the end mean significant richness to the final outcome. There were discussions, and I'm thinking about some discussions, for instance, that we had in London, where I think that we started in very different, with very different perspectives and starting points. And I was listening to Tom and Tom's team and understanding where they wanted to go. And I think that the same happened for Tom and the team. So these very different perspectives and approaches, of course, we can't say that we will end up by having the same approach and the same perspective, because we come from different points. But it's very, very enriching to understand far beyond the provision or the proposal, where do the teams and the leadership come from, what they want to achieve. And we are different at the start, but we managed to get much closer. So this was a real stress test, and this is in the slide. This was a real stress test for both boards, for the chairs as well, for the board. But I think that the result is very, it's a very good result, and it worked well under this stress test. We hope that in the future it will not be as stressful as it was this time, and this is why we need to take the learnings from this process, that next time we will probably have to try to coordinate timings, time schedules, and again, speak from the start and not at the end. Of course, there was a lot of time, energy, agility, etc., dedicated to this coordination project, and they were all not. Sometimes they are a little bit scarce. Time was for sure scarce, mostly for us, in the circumstances where the IESBA was by the time that this project was, this initiative was launched. Resources are what they are. I'm not going to speak about what you well know that we don't have. But also the agility, and this is also a learning for the future, that we need to work on the agility of the people, of the chairs, of the groups, teams, processes, and etc. And this is a learning process. This is not something that you can tell people and ourselves that you have to change from July 1 to July 2. It's a learning process. It's something that we'll have to have up front and top of mind for the future, is that we need to be more agile. And move forward from where we are, trying to understand the other's point of view and get to a point which is satisfactory for the public interest, for the stakeholders, and not for our egos and the esteem that we have for our own product and creation, which, of course, we want people to be proud of what we do, but we need to move away from that pride and make sure that what we deliver is the best for the public interest. So there was a lot of stakeholder requirements in this, in respect to this coordination. So we tried to understand where they were coming from. Some of these requests were more meaningful than others. There were some requests on coordination which was more, wow, you don't use the same words, and things like that, which were not that substantial. There were others which could be substantial or were substantial. So we also made a big effort in trying to understand stakeholders' points of view and perspectives, and move forward and come up with a product which satisfies the stakeholders' requests and concerns. So I think that there was a lot to learn. I'm happy that we reached the point that we reached, and that we were able in September to come to a solution, or a number of solutions which I think are very, very stable and respond to stakeholders' concerns. Thank you.
Thank you to both of you for that. Do you want to talk a little bit about, we've obviously seen the document, but just your sense of the outcomes, because that's obviously really important. It is very useful that you spend all the time, but where did all of this land? And if I can put the question differently, are there any potential problems that will still pop up with significant divergence between definitions that can create confusion? Are you comfortable with the outcomes that will address the concerns previously around this?
So I think one of the things we didn't mention is the area where we grappled the most, and I highlighted this in my comments, was all the work around groups. And we talked about having some practical guidance that would be shared between the two boards, like what are the decision path ends and what are the implications if we go in some circumstances. So both boards, we talked about it, that it would be an area where joint guidance could be helpful. Now, from our standpoint, things are locked down. Are committed to what's in this document. I think we've got an alignment on all these materials, so there's no risk. But you know, going back to Gabriella's point about the diversity of views, where we landed on what you see in J1, where there's the changes, we got to a simpler solution too, which is probably helpful for the rest of the world. I think Janine's been our key protagonist, so keep on reminding us, like, make it simpler. And so I just saw a James Carville documentary, so maybe keep it simple, stupid was the right way to go about it. But yeah, I just wanted to highlight that was an area where, working with IESBA, we got to a better solution.
And your standards approved, so I have to ask you, Gabriella, are you worried that there might be something that pops out where there could be a temptation to diverge from the agreed definitions?
Thank you for that question, Linda. I think that the response is no. I'm not saying that our project is final. It is not final. There are discussions still to be held with the board. There are some 2 or 3 remaining topics where we need to work a little bit. But I don't think, or I'm almost sure that, I'm sure that it won't impact the level of coordination that we reached. It's about our own business and our own materials and how we are going to deliver them. The board was fine with what we presented in terms of coordination. Janine was there. There were no questions. The question is more about the options, if there are any, not about the coordination results and outputs. So I think, I mean, it's October still, but I'm fully confident that there won't be any impactful changes.
Thank you very much. I've got a question from Tom, and I suspect then I can give you a slightly earlier coffee break. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Chair. Just I want to congratulate you for your effort for the coordination. And I totally agree with Gabriella in the sense that the earlier communication is very important, and earlier and high-level communication is very important. The one little bit specific question is that the relationship, one example might be the impact of a technology project and farm culture and governance. We often hear that through for example, the private equity investment, and at the same time we hear that from Tom that the IAASB would like to encourage the technology progress to be incorporated in the IESBA project. In that sense, through the private equity investment, might have some sort of impact on the farm culture and governance. How do you view, this is not in the press for the coordination, but this is one of the examples that the high level and early stage discussion between the two boards might be very helpful. So could you give us your view on, for example, this topic?
Thank you for the question, Tom. The answer is yes, and we are completely aware of that. And on the 3 topics that you mentioned, technology, farm culture and governance, and private equity investment. And we are so aware of that in an enlarged way that these are going to be the topics on the Stakeholder Advisory Council agenda. That we worked, and Tom and I were involved in the building of the agenda and etc. to make sure that this is approached as a topic. These are approached as topics which concern and have to do with both boards, and not as the IESBA project or Tom's project or whatever. So that idea of coordination, I don't know if it's coordination, but dialogue, joint reflection, early understanding of what's in these projects or matters for both boards and etc. is very, very present in our minds, top of mind, actually. On technology, as Tom mentioned, we are working, the teams are working together. Of course, we are in different stages and phases. We are not developing standards. We did it already. It's not, that doesn't mean that we won't do anything in addition, but not for the time being. So this is the status of the thing. Then on private equity, how it relates with technology, because there can be some apparent conflict between the need for the firms to invest in technology, but also the need for the firms to avoid situations where their independence can be seriously conflicted and threatened, and etc. Firm culture and governance, ISQM, and etc. So this is completely clear for us, and we are starting our conversations in that respect. And it will be very interesting to see what the SAC, the Stakeholder Advisory Council, will bring us, exactly because we want it to be addressed as a common concern or matter, and not Tom's concern or Gabriela's concern or whatever.
Thank you very much. Anything else from your side, Gabriela or Tom? Thank you, good. Then I just need to say thank you very much. It is very comforting for us. We were concerned about this before. We know you had lots of comments externally. There's been significant leadership from the two of you to lead from the front. As you say, there are certain inflection points where it's very important for you to get involved, and as for the rest, the staff and under the leadership of Ken and really take care of it. So well done, and very important, as you said, Gabriela, to continue on those other topics as well. I'm going to give you an early coffee break, and I won't cut it short because yesterday I was in trouble for cutting the lunch break short. So can we all reconvene at 11 o'clock? Thank you. Just giving Begonia a chance. She's going to be back in a second, I'm sure. Welcome back, everybody, and welcome again to Gabriela and James. And we've got Ken online to get the feedback from IESBA. So thank you very much, Gabriela. I'm going to hand over to you. Shall we again make the logical breaks after each section? So over to you.
Thank you very much, Linda and the PIOB board. Happy to speak to these slides and provide you a little bit of an update of the work of the IESBA on the most relevant areas. But of course, I will be available to any questions that you may have on other topics which are not in these slides. So, first thing, sustainability and experts, then we will move to firm culture and governance, and finally, a very brief update on the CIV's project, which is a very dear one to the PIOB. On sustainability, this is nothing new, but just as a context, we are, of course, on track to, for approval in December 2024. This is a little bit the timeline of the work and the milestones between now, where we are, and December. The task forces on sustainability task force and experts task force will meet in 2 weeks to address the developments and the work that has been that is being done by the staff on the basis of the discussions that we had in September at the board. So the task force will discuss a revised version of the draft provisions and prepare the documents for the next call of the board, which is on November 8th. So this was an exceptional board meeting or call that we decided to hold to make sure that arriving at in December, everything will be as stable as possible. So this will be an important landmark and milestone, November 8th, a virtual board meeting where the intention is as much as possible to discuss and solve any possible remaining issues and concerns and get out of this call with the work almost done, which means that between our intention is that between November 8th and December 6th, or before that, because the documents will have to be posted before, the team and the board will mostly be working on the finalization of the standards on the basis of this discussion. We don't expect to have remaining critical strategic topics to be discussed in December, and actually the ones that will be discussed in November 8th are, I think, just some 2 or 3 remaining topics, which of course will still deserve the attention of the board, and I suspect some discussions which can be relevant for the finalization of the documents. Our plan is that the IESBA board meeting will be held between the 2nd of December and the 6th of December, and the plan is to have the standards approved by the board on the 6th of December. If you look at the agenda, which I think has, I don't know if it has already been published or not, but the agenda is mostly sustainability and experts. Of course, we'll have to address a few other topics, but it starts with sustainability on Mondays and Tuesday, etc., with a view of having the approval by the end of the week on the 6th of December. And the plan is to submit the due process packages, so the final standards, approved final standards, and the basis for conclusions to the PIOB for the due process purposes by the 13th of December. This is, of course, an unusual approach to the work because it usually takes a significant extended or larger time to submit these documents. This was planned before the summer, so as to make sure that we will be in a position to deliver these documents or provide these documents to the PIOB as soon as possible, as close to the approval date as possible. So the teams are already working in parallel with the finalization, with the start of the standards. The teams are already working on the basis for conclusions and other documents, so as to make sure that this week after the board meeting, or these days after the board meeting, will be used mostly to finalize, tweak, and adjust what will have already been done and ready by the time. This is, of course, another factor, another source of stress, and another stress test for the teams and the board as well. The board will not have much time to see the documents, but I'd like also to recall and highlight that these basis for conclusions are not board documents, are staff documents. That's how they have always been treated and understood. They are not approved by the board, so of course we give the board the opportunity to look and see and highlight any possible fatal flaws, but they are not board documents. Otherwise, it would not be possible to be dealt with this way, because we would need to give the board more time. In any case, the basis for conclusions will be very much based on the documents that have already been prepared for the board, so that there will be nothing new or very new for the board members, nor to the PIOB, I would say, as the documents for the board meetings, mostly for the September board meeting, were already prepared, having in mind that they should serve as a basis for the basis for conclusion. So this means that this is a different way of working, an agile way of working that we are testing and piloting. I think that if it works well, and I think it will work well, it will serve as for the future as a way of simplifying the life of the boards and of the team, even if in the first moment it may seem, and it is, very burdensome, because it's completely changing the process and the way of working, etc. But I really hope that this will become an element of agility, both for the IESBA, the board, and the PIOB as well. So these are the plans. In short, why have we made this effort and this sprint to finalize the standards as soon as possible in December, and certainly in December? And this is nothing new for the PIOB as well, but just to recall that this was, firstly, a response and a commitment that we made to regulators mostly, but also to the market, asking for finalization by the end of 2024, and the reasons are the reasons that are familiar to you, that because mandatory assurance will become mandatory on January 2025, and this was the main reason why, namely IOSCO, but also IFIAR, PIOB as well, along this 2 years process, were insistently asking if we would be able to be ready on 2024. And it was not evident at the start, since we started working in December 2022, so this was really an accelerated process compared to what we have done before, in a very complex area, with 3 projects at the end running in parallel: ethics standards for sustainability reporting, ethics and independent standards for sustainability assurance, and experts. There was a clear call and need for the standards to be ready by 2024. This was the commitment that we made publicly. We had the IOSCO reports or statements, and the FSB statements as well, 2 or 3, saying we welcome the commitment to be ready on 2024. This is needed. So this is what we have done, and proud to have managed to get here on time and to meet our commitments. So also, and this is not only about IESBA responding positively to stakeholders' requests, we made our own reflection on the topic, and of course we came to the conclusion that for the public interest, this was what we needed to do. For all these reasons, but also because, and speaking about coordination, ISA 5000 will be, and is already premised on IESA. There is an undeniable connection and interrelation between the 2 standards, even if both are framework neutral, but the interoperability between the 2 standards is is key, is critical. And of course, if we weren't ready on time to allow those who will consider ISA 5000 for adoption and implementation to be able to consider IESA jointly with ISA 5000, there would be, or there will be, depending on how it happens, a risk of fragmentation because jurisdictions making decisions on adoption and implementation may move forward with other options in terms of ethics standards or ethics framework if they are not available for them to take them on board. So this risk, and this can happen in a very short time frame because with mandatory assurance happening in January 2025, ISA 5000 being available in September, there is a risk in this very short time frame that decisions are made which can harm the public interest, purpose, and objective of having a consistent, fully consistent and interoperable framework and package for performance standards and ethics standards. This was always the goal. I don't know if you remember the famous slide and very simple slide with the final infrastructure that we all envisaged. And so interestingly, even the IESBA is using our slide because they really think that it's the way to take with a consistent reporting framework, sustainability reporting framework, consistent sustainability assurance framework, and a consistent ethical and independence framework for reporting and assurance. This is how the final infrastructure should look like, and of course, for that purpose, which really serves the public interest, we needed to be ready on time and to deliver and make available the standards for those who will make their decisions, the jurisdictions who will start working on adoption and implementation, to be able to work together on the package of performance standards and ethics standards. So in September, September was a very, very important meeting because after all the efforts on coordination, and of course we all know that coordination, the main topics for coordination were also the main topics where the board was still wanting to discuss and make some amendments and etc. It was a really, really productive and I think constructive meeting. Before in other meetings we had seen a little bit more nervous and concerned approaches. Even the board members who still had some considerations were very constructive and very focused on what really matters. So there was a very broad support for the clarified independence principles addressing these topics of group sustainability assurance engagements and value chain components, which were basically the most critical topics that we discussed in September. All the rest was more or less stable. There was support for retaining the proposed scope from the start, which puts this framework at the same level as the requirement and the exigency as the existing part 4A for financial statements. And with respect to the profession agnostic approach that we took, also under the call of regulators and others, but also upon the reflection that we also made and that IAASB also took as an option and a strategic approach to the standards, it was considered stable. There are some remaining questions about what are you going to do to make sure that the non-professional accountants will be able to understand and adopt and etc. But we are already working on that. It's not that public, it's not that noisy, but the work that we have been doing with them is an incredible work from the start until we managed to get this agreement or decision from IAAF to adopt the IESBA standards. But of course we will continue, and it's in our plans for the near future. There was support for the balanced approach with respect to communication and no cloud. There were these questions that also the PIOB raised about why consider communicate and not communicate. So we moved away from the initial proposal in the ED and managed to get a balance between the considerations of those, mostly regulators and policymakers, who thought that in all situations the audit or the practitioner should communicate in case there was something that he or she was faced with, while others think that this should not at all exist. So this is a balanced approach, and I think it's a very well-balanced approach because it takes into consideration, namely, the concerns about the balance between the need to communicate and the confidentiality reasons that over time did not allow for such an approach. There are a few remaining topics, as I was saying at the start, and the few remaining matters to address are the further clarity or additional clarity with respect to the meaning of the use of the term at which assurance work is performed, and this was a very much discussed topic with the IAASB, where we both made some changes to make sure that it was consistent, but still there is some work to be done in that respect. On the transitional provisions, this is particularly relevant for non-assurance services, fees and things like that, where questions were raised about how are we going to deal with existing situations with a pre-period of contracting non-assurance services and etc. So this is already being addressed by the task force. The task force, as I said, will meet in 2 weeks, and this is one of the topics in the agenda. And I think that I can say that the proposal from the task force, I never want to go ahead of my board and my task forces, but I think that I can say that there will be proposals on transitional provisions for non-assurance services. At least they are being provided, and I think that they will satisfy the concerns of those who were not very comfortable with a more one-off approach. And some questions still on the use of multiple external experts, which is more about clarifying the approach than about making changes on what's being proposed. Now, on implementation, support, adoption, and etc. This is, I was telling Tom, that my mind is already in 2025. So this is what keeps me awake at night today and yesterday and tomorrow, is how are we going to make sure that these standards will have the necessary and the appropriate level of adoption and implementation. And this will be a very, very big effort, which needs to be very well prepared, very well structured, very strategically addressed. Of course, we will promote the standards as much as we can. We have an informal group of board members who are taking care of this to make sure that we address this topic in a very structured, strategic, and planned way, that there will be no overlaps, that there will be synergies where synergies can be made, etc. So the key pillars of this approach and strategy is, of course, advocacy and engagement. So we have to go around the world, virtually or in person, to make sure that these standards are known and understood. A lot of capacity building, but this mostly through collaboration. And what does this mean? The IESBA is a very small team, we don't have the resources, of course, ourselves to do what is needed in terms of adoption, in terms of capacity building. So the strategy here is to use others to do this. We are trying to implement some partnerships, of course, with IFAC, it's the first one, but also with others. The UNCTAD has been a very, very reliable and useful partner for us. IOSCO, of course, IESBA, our first foundation. So as much as possible, we will use the others to do what we can't do. It's about training the trainer, it's about using their platforms, it's about being taken on board in their fast-moving trains in this area, and etc. And of course, monitor how it goes, which is going to be a very difficult but important part of the process. Of course, we will do this in close coordination with IAASB, even if the timelines are not the same. We have a common effective date, and there will be some joint initiatives to launch these standards as a package, as they should be. So after everything is stable and done, we will, and we are already speaking about that, Tom and I, what can we do jointly to make sure that this package is a package and can be used by stakeholders as such. And that's it on sustainability, and I'll stop here, Linda, and happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you very much for that, Gabriela. We had a preparation session yesterday, and obviously discussed this. It was Janine's first time observing the IESBA meeting, and she came back and gave us feedback on the really good engagement and interaction when it comes to the debates at your board. There are a couple of comments, and you obviously, and of course, stress the importance of getting the standard out on time, and that is really important. And I know you've got two more meetings to go before then, and you spoke about some of the things that's on your agenda to finalize, and we have those on our list as well. And I'll quickly go through the list of key points. Janine will fill the gaps if I leave anything out, key points that we discussed. But I believe there is a little bit of an overarching theme when it comes to, probably from now until you hopefully get to the place to approve this in December, which you know, and that is how to deal with complexity and create clarity, which is always a very difficult thing in standard setting, because how do you cut it down to the level of information that's clear and concise? And I know you've done a lot of work. You spoke about some of those. So I'm going to, in no particular order, maybe just run through the list of things that we raised, and some of them were already on your list as well. So let me just do that, and then I'll check in with you, Janine. So the first one, and you specifically spoke about it, and you specifically said you need to create further clarity on which level of independence is applicable in which situation. And we saw that type of a flow chart that you attached, if I'm not mistaken, behind your report, which is useful, and the concept of a flow chart is useful, but many of us still struggle to understand it. And we thought, if we struggle to understand it, will practitioners and will non-practitioners understand it? So I agree with you that there's absolutely, that's the core of it. People need to know where to go to, what's applicable to me, what independence requirements apply to me or apply to other people, assurance providers that are used in doing that opinion. So that was the first one. We also wondered whether the independence requirements, especially for the first round, might be too restrictive for the sustainability assurance providers down in the value chain. Maybe just something to think about, and I'm sure you've debated it. Maybe you can comment on that. Then on NOCLAR, you spoke about NOCLAR, and you explained the difference between having requirements and and how you described it at the value chain level. But and you said it's a balanced approach, but we just battled with the principle that it's that NOCLAR is not necessarily a requirement, classified as a requirement for everybody. So maybe you can just expand on that, because I know you've touched on it. I'm just quickly checking my notes. And maybe just on that NOCLAR point, we thought that it is, in any event, when it comes to those assurance providers, they are in the value chain. They are communicating in any event to the component assurance provider, and on other things, on independence requirements and all sorts of other things. So why it's not so difficult to also have NOCLAR requirements. Then and this was one that we had quite a bit of a debate on the proportion of fees, where you talk about, and we think this can be quite a big hurdle if you don't think very carefully about that. When we talk about when it is a mandatory, you brought in this principle that when it's a mandatory assurance engagement, then if the auditor is also providing the sustainability assurance function or service, then that wouldn't be considered, that assurance assignment wouldn't be considered as being added to other assurance services, and therefore not getting you over that threshold of what potentially affects your independence as the auditor. But when it's not a mandatory requirement by law, then it would. So I think that might be problematic in many places, because I can think of quite a couple of countries that might not immediately, for example, where I come from, I'm not sure that there's immediately going to be a mandatory requirement, but there are very significant international companies, and now suddenly there's this problem that by providing the assurance service and also doing the audit, there's an independence issue, because it's very likely, I believe, that the assurance work on the sustainability report fee-wise might actually be more than the assurance work on the financial, especially in early years. If you think about all the experts and so on, might actually be more than the cost of the statutory audit. So that it actually hooks onto another principle in the code in any event that talks about assurance services being included in considering that independence with other services. So just really something that we think you need to reconsider, because we do believe that it's going to create this hurdle for auditors to also provide the assurance on sustainability reports, which is very far from ideal, especially for corporates, because that is often the people that know your business really well. So if you want to comment on that, that would be useful. And then there are one or two more before I hand over to Janine. You spoke about the transitional provisions, which is really important, agree. We just wondered with the sort of the open-endedness potentially of the transitional provisions, whether there's unintended consequences. And then we spoke a little bit about the level playing fields for different assurance providers, where you talk about the level of knowledge, skills, and experience for professional accountants, but then with the non-professional accountants, it's not a requirement, it's the expectation, and you touched on that. And you changed the wording to expectation, but is that not making it harder for the professional accountants? Does that create level playing fields between the different assurance providers? And then my last comment is just on the scope of Part 5, which is mandatory or general purpose assurance assignments. Therefore, if they, and then Part 4B, which is for non-PAs. But I'll go back to, for example, the examples that I just mentioned in a country that hasn't adopted this. What will those assurance, it's not clear what those assurance providers should, where do they fit in? Do they fit into Part 5 because that's just for mandatory, or do they fit into Part 4B because that's just for non-PA? So that's maybe a clarity point as well. Before I dig myself into a hole, Janine, did we need to clarify anything, or did I leave anything out?
Thank you, Linda. You gave a good summary, but maybe a few more things just to clarify also with some additional concerns around the clarity of the charts. I understood, Gabriela, that it's still work in progress and that your task force is meeting in 2 weeks' time. And as Linda was saying, the chart is very helpful, and it's very complex to start with all the different types of practitioners involved, whether they're a component practitioner, another practitioner, but also depends on whether there is they're doing their work for a component, a group component or a value chain component, and whether there is sufficient appropriate involvement by the group sustainability assurance practitioner in the work that another is doing, and whether he or she can give direction, supervision, and review. So it's a very complex thing. And the clarity, as Linda said, is of course is important so that everyone can understand. But there, since I also saw that there was further thinking by the task force in your presentation later on there in the attachment, there is a updated schedule. But that triggered two things for me in a sense, or three concerns actually. The clarity is, to make it more specific, the clarity aspect sees also upon who is now actually addressed in the chart, from which perspective or whose perspective is the independence mentioned. And it sometimes sort of seems as if that could change from, whether it's from the perspective of another practitioner or the component practitioner versus the group sustainability assurance practitioner and their firm. So that's an important concern. The other one is the one that you have now the direction supervision review as a dividing principle. And so it also could be that a component, a group component that is part of the consolidated financial statements is actually the group sustainability assurance practitioner would say, no, I cannot give any direction supervision or review. And then the independence regime is much less stringent than in the latest version I saw in your presentation, than for any other group component in the consolidated group. So I'm talking about a group component that normally is consolidated. There's in the financial audit, you have a component auditor that is doing a lot of work, but for the sustainability assurance, the independence is then only that you need to have some confirmation, or it's less than you would normally have in a financial audit. And I think that's a very important aspect to think through and to make clear why that is. Why that it can be less, because there is the risk, and that was also a debate at the IAASB, that an undue decision made maybe to say, yeah, I cannot have sufficient appropriate involvement, and less independence requirements is also attractive maybe.
And I think, Janine, the point is made, there seem to be a lot of question marks and there's some clarity needed.
Clarity. But the last one is another one. And that is about the value chain that you were referring to. The concern is also when it is a value chain, now when there is direction, supervision and review, but it's still in the value chain, there is now also a higher level of independence required than if there were no direction, supervision and review. And the question is, could that have any impact on companies not able to find an independent sustainability assurance practitioner because of the fact that in the value chain there is a component that has this independence requirement. So those are the things we really want to ask you to, your task force, to work on and to make it clear to us how that works and whether there are risks or not and what these risks are, and for the next meeting. So then on the NOCLAR, you say a balanced approach. I also wanna it's between the group sustainability assurance practitioner all the way through the value chain, but it's also between the group sustainability assurance practitioner and the financial auditor, where we want to ask your attention for. And a balanced approach, I struggle a little bit because in your proposal, also what came out of the discussion in September, there is already unless prohibited by laws and regulations. So why would you need a balanced approach, so not requiring NOCLAR, while you already have it's only applicable when your laws and regulations allow for it. So I struggle to see why you should limit yourself then in requiring NOCLAR communication. And on the transitional provision, maybe to make it a little bit more clear with an example, the big risk on the in particular also could be multi-year contracts that would be entered into before the 15th of December in 26. Could be, for instance, which are actually services that are often provided by accounting firms, providing support in the internal control system for reporting on sustainability information. And there is the self-review threat. And the question is, what will happen under your current transitional provision, and what to do with this self-review threat, And it's an open-ended provision now, so good to hear that you're going to work on this. But also, it's not only that it's open-ended, but also there's some unclarity. Like if there is a self-review threat, is still, with this transitional provision, would that then still be that the conceptual framework with safeguards approach, the threats and safeguards approach would still apply? Or would this transitional provision override the safeguards approach, or the threats and safeguards approach? So that is also very important to understand. So I think those were the most important things. Yeah, and the expectation, one more. There's also one on the expectation for sustainability assurance practitioner on quality management. And that's also a difference if you look at the level playing field with a professional accountant, because they have to follow, assuming they use ISA's quality, or, well, ISQ1.
This is the expectation.
So
on the
here
other
it's
hand,
the
yeah.
wording is the expectation. So thanks.
Back to you. Thank you, Gabriela.
I'll try to cover everything. I think that Ken is online, so if necessary, I'll ask Ken to provide a little bit more information, not only about the most technical aspect, even if I don't think that this is the place to discuss technical.
Yeah, we don't want to go into the technical
But
detail. I
if
think
any,
it's
if
more the
any
overarching
clarity is necessary, or if Ken thinks that it's useful, I'll kindly ask him to come in. So first thing, how to deal with complexity and create clarity. Yes, we are aware of that concern of some complexity that still persists in the proposals. Now, two things which I think it's important to say. First is that, of course, we are addressing that, and we'll address it until the very end in the best way possible. It is in our interest and in public interest that what we do is well understood, is clear, can be implemented, enforceable, and etc. So irrespective of the success or lack of success of this effort, this is something that we are very clear, that we acknowledge, and that we will be working on until the very last minute. But there is also something that it's important to highlight, which is we are dealing with a complex reality. So we can tweak and work on the way we address that complex reality. We can't change the reality, or otherwise we'll have to change the whole system. When we start speaking about another practitioner, the practitioner component, value chain component, value chain entity, etc., group engagement in, this is a complex reality. So there is no way that we can change that reality unless we decide to clean up everything and start from scratch. And I doubt that we will get to a simpler solution, because this is by nature a complex reality. So we need to separate the complexity of the fundamentals and of the reality and the complexity of the way the standards address that complexity. Again, there is a commitment, my commitment and the commitment of my board and team to make it as simple as possible. So any suggestions in that respect would be very welcome, because you know how these things work. In developing the standards, there is so much technical work, so much thinking, so much discussion, that sometimes it's a little bit difficult to step back and see it from the distance and understand how we could have done it in a different way. Suggestions, very welcome. The level of independence of each situation, the flowcharts are well, as you saw, Janine, something that was prepared from one afternoon or evening to the morning after. So we did not have the time nor the opportunity for the task force to reconvene and work on the flowcharts, but of course there is a commitment that we will make them as understandable, readable, and simple as possible. And we take good note of that proposal, or that concern, that in each situation it must be very clear what's in it for the practitioner, for the firm, and etc. So that we separate the situations and segment them in a way which is very clear. The comment on if we are becoming too restrictive, and namely if there will be difficulty in the market to find an independent auditor or practitioner due to the requirements on value chain. Here, let's be clear. we came, even if it's probably not yet evident, we came to the lowest level of requirement that we could have. The next one would be not having anything on value chain. And I don't think that this is what the PIOB and stakeholders and the biggest part of the stakeholders want. Of course, there may be some stakeholders who would like it, but we don't think at all that this is in the public interest. We had that discussion before when we decided to include it in our exposure draft. The reactions of stakeholders were what they were. There were some concerns that there was an ethical framework for value chain without a performance framework, which was as developed when IAASB did it, we coordinated. So I think that in practice we have all that we need. We did a lot of work and made a lot of strategic decisions in terms of lowering the requirements, and this was made in September. And namely, we, just to give you some examples, we deleted the provisions requiring the application of the no or has reasons to believe test with respect to a value chain entity if the firm is using the work of another practitioner. We developed a new structure that simplifies the requirements and aligns with ISO 5000. This is really a simpler approach than the one that we had in the exposure draft. Whoever performs assurance work at the value chain component within the reporting boundary, and this is new, and also to align with ISO 5000 and IAASB, needs to be independent. And we don't think that we can go below this. It's really the minimum that we could require in terms of value chain. In thinking about the public interest, probably we should be requiring more. Probably the initial proposal in the exposure draft was more exigent, more requiring, but trying to address everything. But we are also sensitive to the comments that this is new. There can be so many entities in the value chain, a burden, administrative burden. We removed all the administrative burden. In fact, there is nothing new here. In addition, this is not mentioned in our documents, but just think, for instance, about what's happening in Europe, about with the CSDDD, the due diligence directive, where the value chain becomes an incredible important part of the story. It can be, in some cases, be more important than the subject entity itself. So not addressing value chain, for us, it's a no-go, and we lowered the requirements. Now, a different thing is...
Gabriela, apologies to interject, but we absolutely take your point, and that's really useful. I would imagine after all of this, and fairly soon, similar to the IAASB, you'll probably keep your radar on to see if there are any unintended consequences. And if there's something that comes out here, then that is something that you can pick up. So we absolutely take your point.
Sure, Linda, and thank you for raising that. Of course we do, and we think that we have the enough or a lot of critical thinking around the table at the board to bring us and make us aware of unintended consequences, and some of the board members have been very valuable in that respect, and that's why we made these significant amendments to the initial proposal. So on NOCLAR, again, and here I'll ask Ken if he wants to add something, but the question was really what we initially decided was to suggest to consider reporting. This is what's already in the standard on NOCLAR, so we did not innovate in that respect. And then there were comments that from the regulators that we should go beyond that. And all the considerations taken on board, we thought that this was a balanced approach which takes in consideration both the concerns and both the objectives. In the most obvious situations, we require to communicate. When it's outside the network and things like that, the considerations on confidentiality on the one hand and the difficulties and also the unintended consequences suggest that we should only recommend or we require to consider communicating. And this consider to communicate means that if they don't communicate, they will have to have a good basis for not doing that. It's not just a decision like this, I decide to communicate or I don't decide to communicate. Considering means that they have to take on board all the elements that are needed to assess if communicating is the best option or if not communicating is the best option. The proportion of fees, we had a big discussion during the board meeting on this, and I'm not going again to go ahead of my task force and my board, but I think that there will be changes, significant changes in the final proposal to be discussed in November, which will address all your concerns, Linda, and there were some elements which were discussed on top of those that we already knew, namely aligning with the CSRD approach to this topic and etc. So yes, we were sensitive to the discussion, and I think that there will be significant adjustments to address those concerns. And I'm not going to say more, but not promising, over-promising, but I think I'm confident about what I'm saying. Transitional provisions and the unintended consequences, also the risk that you mentioned, Janine, and that you well raised during the board meeting about these long-term contracts, last-minute contracts, and all these realities that we know that are sometimes used intentionally to circumvent the rule, others because it's just a shallow attitude regarding the existing contracts. All that will be taken on board. I don't have a response to you now about how these transitional provisions will look like. Maybe in 2 weeks' time, I'm in a better position to tell you that. What I can tell you is that that discussion was a very good discussion, I think, because it helped us exactly identify some unintended consequences or possible gaps, let's say that, in the existing provisions, and we will make the best possible and work on the best possible approach to make sure that all that is well covered, because we know that otherwise there will be many ways of making the provision more fragile when being applied. PA versus non-PA. This is a dear topic to everyone and to me as well. First thing, this is the first time that we are experiencing this approach. This is same thing for IAASB and IESBA. For any reason, there are more concerns about the IESBA approach to non-PAs, which is not. I mean, I don't think that these concerns are based on full understanding of the reality. And I'm going to try to explain again. The IESBA standards, the sustainability assurance standards, ethics and independence standards for sustainability assurance, profession agnostic, they are not telling anyone if non-professional accountants should or should not be doing, performing sustainability assurance. This is not for the IESBA. We don't say that this must exist or not. This is for the jurisdictions to decide. And we know that there will be jurisdictions which will not allow non-professional accountants to be performing sustainability assurance. Some European countries already made that decision, for instance, while there will be others which will be completely open, namely in some European countries, but also Asia, etc., for that. This is not for us. What we are setting here with these standards is really a framework which, if and when non-professional accountants are allowed, authorized to perform sustainability assurance, then there will be the exact same level of requirement for both professional accountants and non-professional accountants.
Let me just come in here because it's a really important point, because we know one of the big, I understand exactly what you're saying, and one of the big points that the PIOB has been driving when we engage with regulators is exactly the point on level playing field, to say that IESBA can set the standards, or the IAASB can set the standards, but it's up to you as policymakers to require those other assurance providers to comply with it. What we battle with is, if you now have a country, or if that requirement comes through in a country to say other assurance providers can also do this work, and you have to comply with the IESBA code. And you read that, then it reads, a professional accountant should, but if you're not a professional accountant, it's expected of you. So can you see that in the wording of the standard, even if you're required to read it, me as the non-professional accountant will say, well, I'm not the professional accountant, so I can choose if I want to do this. I'm expected, but maybe there's a good reason not to. And that's what our concern is, because we absolutely agree you can't be setting the requirement in law. But once that requirement is set in law, there are two different verbs being used to say.
Sorry, Alina. I see your point. I confess that it hadn't come to my mind that could create that confusion, and maybe we can still address it through guidance or some changes. But our approach is the following. We can't say in the code that non-professional accountants must, because we don't have that authority. But what we are saying is that if regulators, policymakers, whatever, decide that you are allowed, then you have to comply with this.
If required by law, then they must. I think that's sort of stronger wording that it's expected.
Okay, we
But
will
think
take
about
that
it.
on
I
board
think you
and see
understand
what we
I'm
can do
saying.
to clarify that topic. But
Okay.
I'd like to clarify that our vision and our objective is to have exactly the same framework for anyone providing the same services. And for the future, this will really be our line of thinking. If anyone is providing a service, it is in the public interest that the client, the investor, etc., does not have to care about who is providing the service, because he or she will be equally protected irrespective of the provider. This is the approach of the financial services regulations and laws and etc. Doesn't matter who you are, it matters that you have to protect the investor. So this is our vision, and we are not, it is not in our plans or vision that there will be calibrable provisions for professional accountants and non-professional accountants, which at some point we were required to do, and we said, no, there is no way you can calibrate. This is in the public interest, this is what investors need. So if you want to be active, please comply. On scope of Part 5, as you saw, the board reconfirmed that this is the scope that we should have for the time being. And this is this project, or this on sustainability, is a phased one. So we started by saying, what do we need to do? We need to make sure that for the situations, cases, reports of highest importance, we need to have a framework. We can't have a framework and deliver a framework, develop a framework which covers everything at the same time, because otherwise the complexity will be much bigger. We need to test what we are doing. This is completely new, so let's address what is really more important, which is the required by law for purpose of decision making and all those things. Now, if you ask me, Linda, Janine and all, what about the voluntary reports? Aren't they important? Yes, of course they are. But let's put it like this. In the existing code for financial statements, there is already a difference between those who are required by law and those which are voluntary. That's why you have Part 4A and Part 4B. Different requirements, different levels of requirement for both situations. So this is somehow replicated here, and we could even be satisfied, more or less, with some adjustments, what we have in Part 4B, which will still apply. Part 4B can already be applied to voluntary reports, as it is. Now, you tell me, okay, but it's not fit for purpose because it's not adjusted to sustainability. Right, that's true, but it already applies and provides some support. Secondly, and you are more than right when you say, what about non-professional accountants? And this is the real problem here, and that's why we need to move forward very fast. because for non-professional accountants, Part 4B doesn't apply because it's not profession agnostic. So we are very conscious of the need to develop something similar to what we did with Part 5 for voluntary reports and other reports. That's what we will prioritize in principle, and again, I don't want to put myself ahead of my board and my team and my task forces, etc. But there is a plan, it's in our strategy and work plan, that we will move forward with this very quickly. So it will be a temporary partial gap because Part 4B already provides some support. It's mandatory for professional accountants, whatever they do. For non-professional accountants, we suggest that they use it. Is it perfect? No. Would it be possible to have a perfect system now?
Can I just clarify? I'm not sure I understand. So is the intention that whether it's for professional accountants, whether it's mandatory or voluntary, you apply the same rules?
No. What we are saying is that in the extant code, you have Part 4A, which applies to the most relevant, mandatory, etc. Part 4B, which are independence requirements, which are not as strict as the one in Part 4A, because they apply to less important reports. Let's put it like this.
But less important being
Voluntary,
not
voluntary, for instance.
voluntary.
Voluntary, for instance.
But how can that be? Why do we have, and I think that's our difficulty, and maybe you must think about it. Again, if a country, I just think there's a huge risk if a country decides not to adopt for whatever reason, and companies decide to voluntarily do assurance because they might be forced, and I'm in situations where that happens, they might be forced by the international investors and all of that. It's sort of not even debatable. It's really concerning that they then play by lighter rules. And I don't understand the support for that. So maybe, I don't think we have to solve it here, but I think you must just take it back to your board and
But I
think
think it's
about
important, I think this is important that everything is clear. And if necessary, I'll ask Ken to provide additional clarity. But this is the existing situation for financial reports. You have the ones which are mandatory audit, right? Which are ruled by independence provisions in Part 4A. And then you have the other ones which are voluntary, and you know that you have lots of financial statements which are voluntary, are not required by law, are voluntary, etc. But if they are not required by law, the thinking behind this is that, well, if they are not required by law, is that the public interest is not as significant and relevant as with mandatory financial reports. And then Part 4B comes in and says, okay, you still have independence requirements, but they are not as strict as the one which apply to mandatory financial reports. This is the existing approach in the code, which has never been, as far as I know, has never been challenged. We are going to replicate exactly the same approach for sustainability reports. More stringent independence requirements for mandatory sustainability reports, similar, equivalent to the existing ones for mandatory financial reports, and a slightly lighter framework for voluntary reports, again, because the conviction or the assumption is that if the regulators did not require a mandatory report, is that because the public interest is not as significant. So this is the approach. We are just, the vision and the objective is to replicate exactly the approach that we have for financial reports.
Thank you, and I know we're running out of time, so I don't want to belabor the point. I would maybe just suggest, Gabriela, that you take it back and think if there's maybe a PI definition or a publicly traded entity definition overlay for this. But, so just think about it, because they might, you can literally get into a country.
They are captured in the existing scope, but we will,
because there might literally be a country where the listed entities are not required, and because therein lies the reputational risk for.
But
yeah.
This is captured under the scope, the existing scope. But maybe very quickly, may I ask Ken if necessary to provide additional clarity Ken, are you there? Oh, he's there.
Thanks, Ken.
Yes, I am
And
here.
anything
Thank-
else
And
from
he's
your
willing to
side?
speak. I see the hand.
Thank you, Ken. I saw your hand. I thought I'll wait for Gabriella to finish. So anything else on your side from, when it comes to any of these aspects would be useful? And then I would really like for us to go to experts. Thanks.
Yes, well, thank you very much, Linda, and I'm conscious of time as well. Maybe on this issue of mandatory requirements and which part of the sustainability standards will apply. First of all, it really doesn't matter whether the engagement is mandated by law or regulation or whether it's voluntary. Because what determines which part of the standards applies is the nature of the engagement. So if in a jurisdiction even hasn't adopted Part 5, which is the case you're putting forward, if a firm chooses to report in accordance with IESBA standards, maybe it's because that's investor expectations, maybe it's because the firm is a member of the firm of firms and therefore has to comply with the IESBA code, as long as the engagement meets the scoping criteria of Part 5, that firm will be required to apply Part 5. If the engagement is not within the scoping criteria of Part 5, that engagement will need to perform in accordance with Part 4B. That is all that there is to it. It's as simple as
Can
that.
I just check, is that the difference between general purpose and special purpose? Is that what you're referring to?
No, it's not. The criteria, the scoping criteria for Part 5 is yes. The framework has to be a general purpose reporting framework. And therefore, by definition, any special purpose sustainability report information prepared in accordance with that framework, the special purpose will be in Part 4B, right? So that is basically the approach that we have taken in the code in Part 4A relative to audit of financial statements. So it is an equivalent approach where we say it's information is prepared in accordance with the general purpose reporting framework. So we should not confuse the issue between what is mandated and what is not mandated, because Part 5 will apply whether it's mandated or whether it's voluntary. That's what we have to be very clear. It's the scoping that drives which part of the code applies, and also whether you are TA or non-TA. If you are going to comply with the IESBA code, you must determine which lane you're in. And speaking about lane, if I might also speak very briefly about the issue of complexity and the perceived complexity of the flow chart. Really what the flow charts are intended to really drive across is that they are helping the practitioner determine which swim lane they need to be in. And that's why we always start with that first question, the top-level question. Are you
And Ken,
under direction,
apologies to
supervision, and
interject,
review?
but it strikes me, I don't want us to go into the technical detail of it, but it strikes me there might be the need for some further, just looking at it to make sure it's abundantly clear, because if somebody that's very technical like Janine might not have gotten to that answer, I suspect there are very many other people out there that would get to a different answer. So maybe just a clarity of wording aspect. Shall we move on to the next point? Thanks. Ken, any other points from your side on all of these?
I will just take 2 minutes, just in relation to the other points, if I may. And I know Daniel raised a number of technical points. One is the perception that there is going to be differential expectations with respect to independence for a sustainability assurance practitioner that is under direction, supervision, and review, and another practitioner who isn't. That is by design and that is by intent, and that is really all coming from the assurance standard under ISA 5000. And what I mean by that is, when it comes to using the work of another practitioner, and that's a concept that's defined, another practitioner is a firm that's not under direction, supervision, and review, or put it another way, which is how it's couched in ISA 5000, it's a firm that in which the reporting firm is not able to sufficiently and appropriately be involved in that work of that another practitioner. That work that's performed by another practitioner is not work that's performed for the sustainability assurance engagement. It's work they have done on another engagement, but it so happens that as part of the simulations engagement, the reporting firm considers that it may be able to use that work for its purposes, for the purpose of this simulations engagement. So it's, in other words, these are two different engagements, and therefore it is not, if you will, feasible for the reporting firm to impose the same level of independence requirements that it would in relation to a component practitioner that is used for purposes of the
Ken, we are going into a lot of technical detail now, so I would suggest maybe you and Janine must have a conversation about that. I think the overarching comment is just maybe you need to clarify also your conclusions and the why in that flow chart.
Yeah, well, we can certainly look at that, Dean. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think that would be useful for people to understand the underlying thinking of in slightly different situations, how to apply the principles of when are you applying, depending on where you fit in this whole process, when are you applying which independence requirements. Gabriela, I think we can possibly move on to experts, can we? Thank you.
Sorry, if I can just, as we progress to the finalization, and I think this conversation even manifests, there's an appetite, or there is no appetite in this to not have the answers to a variety of scenarios and situations. And so we're seeing that. I think it's, we have to recognize the maturity of this landscape, especially in ethics. And the challenge on complexity and precision is because there's and perhaps I'd say there is an appetite to work through scenarios and have solutions to enable a consistent application and interpretation. And unfortunately, the platform we're playing on, or the game we're playing on, is the standards. And there's no other way at the moment to capture all of those thought processes. So I think it's just a tone and a balance as we start to think that there is a lot of content and explanation. It does not have to reside in the standards. It can reside elsewhere. And even as we explore areas and emerge it, the standards may remain silent in a sense because it's captured by the principle. That's a very hard challenge to balance as you get to your finish line. And I think we're experiencing some of that. So I think complexity, I think we just have to recognize the precision will come over time, but it's an uncomfortable place when we want to answer all of the scenarios. But it's okay to remain silent. Standard setters have done that in spaces for many years. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I think we all recognize that the nature of the beast is complex and it's new, which makes it even more complex. There's a level of clarity, as much clarity as possible is useful. But having said that, there will be areas where, in a way, you don't yet know what you don't know when it comes to some of the consequences. And I take your point that some of it at least might be dealt with through, as time goes by, some adoption, implementation material, all those work that you want to do, guidance and so on. But and maybe sometimes it's just a matter of almost recognizing that, you know, these points need further detail as we go along. And Gabriela, maybe in the interest of time, we just had a few smallish comments, but let me just mention to you what we had on, if I can find my notes again, what we had on experts. So the first one was, it's a little bit linked to that comment before when it comes to the CCO, competence, capability, objectivity, a requirement for external experts. Where that requirement is that the external expert must meet the CCO, but obviously that's it's preferred to be done, that check to be done at the beginning, but or before you use the expert. But realistically, you say it's preferred, but it's not a requirement that it must be done, and in a way that's understandable. But and then you talk about the continuous updating of that CCO, but just also what if somewhere along the line, there is a risk, and we recognize that somewhere along the line, you might decide as the assurance provider, as the group assurance provider, that actually that expert does not meet the CCO. Just maybe a clarification of the consequences or the actions that need to be taken. We thought that was missing. We thought that it is a little bit worrying that you start using an expert and you might actually then decide, well, maybe this guy doesn't actually meet the requirements needed. What then, when you're very far down the line, but also what's the consequences of that? So that's the one point. Oh, and then there was just a general point that came up in our discussion, that sometimes it seems as if there are instances, and you probably just want to go through the document. Janine said she made the comment at the meeting. There are instances in the application material where it sometimes go almost beyond the standard. You know, the requirement is this, but then the application material might go a little bit further. So if you pull out all the application material, be comfortable that the requirements deal with everything. But I know she made the point, but the requirements deal with everything, and the application material is really explaining it and giving further guidance. But I think that's the polishing that's probably going to come through the final drafting. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Linda. On the first topic, yes, that was discussed during the board meeting as well. What should we require first? If it was appropriate to require that the use of the external expert is only decided after a full check of whether the external expert is CCO or not. And practically, we came to the conclusion that that might, in very many situations, prevent the use of the expert, because when the use of an external expert becomes clear, the need for the use of an external expert becomes clear, in many situations there is no time to do this check in a fully, to do a full check before time. So we needed to make sure that we were being as demanding as needed, but without preventing the use of an external expert in very many situations. That is clear. So, of course, if the check is done before and the conclusion is that the external expert is not CCO, can't be used, so that there is no doubt. If it comes, it becomes understood or known during the process or the use of the external expert that that can be the case, then, of course, there will be safeguards and mechanisms in place to address that we maybe need to make a little bit more clear in the application material and guidance, but in that case the code applies. All the conceptual framework and the principles and etc. already existing apply to those situations. How they apply in concrete and what decisions they will drive, that's possibly what we need to make a little bit more clear. But this is not anything that we haven't addressed, and it's being, again, addressed by the experts task force in consequence of the discussions in September and of the fact that this was raised and discussed and etc. So hopefully by November we will have a clear response to that absolutely appropriate concern and question about what to do if that happens. On the second topic, which was on going beyond the standards, I think that I understand your concern is that if we were to delete all the application material, if the requirement is strong enough, and that's possibly a test that we will have to make at the end, is to pull out separate the requirements and the application material and see how far it goes and how resilient the standards and the requirements are. So thank you for that. We will take that on board, but for the time being, we think that they are robust enough, but maybe there are some tweaks that we may need to do or whatever. So that's it.
Thank you, Gabriela. We have a few minutes left, and we really want you to talk about firm culture and governance. I just want to double check, Janine, there are no important points that we left off. Happy. And Gabriela, on firm culture and governance, we're not really going to comment. We noted we got the feedback from Janine on your progress. We also got the feedback from Janine on the level of energy of your board when it comes to this very complex and very interesting and important topic. So we know it's work in progress, and we know you're working towards your project plan and so on, but we would like to get the feedback from you. Maybe you just want to talk for the last 5 minutes on that. Thank you. Apologies, Gabriela, your mic.
Oh, sorry.
I
I'm so
just
sorry.
realized now I
I'm so
can't
sorry.
hear you well.
So I'll start again. Nothing important. Yes, we had a very, very substantial discussion on the very last day of a long week at board meeting. So I was surprised by the level of energy and engagement of the board members. I think it was the only discussion where everyone had something to say. And I think that we are going in the right direction. This is not an easy work stream. And the PIOB were taken with us in this journey of scoping, making sure that we were addressing the right topics, that we will not go beyond our mandate, but that we will cover everything that we need, that we will be useful. That's the purpose. It's not to anything but make something which is in the public interest. I think that we are now in a good place. As I had anticipated in the July meeting with the PIOB, but that had not yet been discussed thoroughly by the task force and the board. The idea is to have, and the proposal, the preliminary recommendations, is to divide this work stream into work streams, let's call it like that for the time being, a standard setting project and a non-authoritative material work stream. The first one focused mostly on governance. Let's put it in a very wide and open way. Standard setting project on governance. The UK and Japan as well, at least, already have their own audit governance codes. These are examples, but of course, this is going to be an international framework, so we cannot just replicate what the UK and Japan have already done, even if there is a very good inspiration. But we want to be really focused on an international framework that could help the firms become the highly ethical firms. I heard you very well, Dave, in July, and I think this is as you see, the approach that we are taking. Help the firms to be the highest ethical firms they could become. And then another project, a non-authoritative material work stream, where we will put the pieces together of everything that we learned over this long journey of outreach, connection with stakeholders, and etc., and try to address a few topics and a few elements, which probably part of them are not for the years, but to be addressed. We will see in the future, but it would be regrettable that after having done realize that this will be important pieces for the building of highly ethical firms, that we would leave them out and unaddressed and unspoken just because they are not in a standard setting project. So this is a little bit not yet clear what we are going to do with this, but it's a framework that will raise awareness about the roles of other stakeholders in this space, namely regulators, but also the profession, and etc. There is a role for each one of them in this. We don't believe that the IESBA will solve, will have the magic wand with the standard setting project of defining what a highly ethical firm is going to be. We will contribute with the standard setting project, but there is more to be done by us in the future, most probably. And let me tell you that after all this long journey, my conclusion is that in the near future, we will probably come to the conclusion that everything that we are doing flows into the firm culture and governance vision and framework, if I can call it like that. So we are trying to, at the same time, we listened very well to stakeholders and namely to the PIOB with respect to the need to focus, scope, be clear about what we are going to do in terms of standard setting, but not limit ourselves to this approach and take other things on board. It's been an incredible journey. I think that part of the stakeholders, and maybe the PIOB, think that we took too long to get here, but it was necessary. We needed to be solid, robust, clear. We needed to speak with everyone. The incredible number of meetings that we had, it's not only because we needed to listen to everyone, but because everyone wanted to be listened. Everybody wanted to speak with us about farm culture and governance. So this is not going to be easy to deal in terms of outreach and stakeholder management, but we are excited about this. We are also aware of the difficulties and obstacles and challenges ahead. We are not neglecting them, but hope to be able to provide something very valuable which will really contribute to creating highly ethical farms. So this is the input that the board gave us. Public trust needs to be reinforced, and I think that this is the central idea. We need to cover both audit and consulting and advisory services within the same firms. We won't, of course, work on the structure of the firm, legal structure. It's not for us to change it, but understand how the existing legal structure of the firms impacts their ethical behavior, ethical culture, and governance, and etc. So I think that we are very well positioned for a final report and recommendation to the board in December, and to start working actively, probably in 2 different groups in this standard setting project and non-authoritative material for other topics.
Thank you very much for this, Gabriela. And no, we never had the thought that you were taking too long at all, so don't worry about that. This is such an important project, and it is really important, as you say, to think about it clearly. There are very many elements. We like the fact that you hang it on creating that highly ethical firm. And then obviously there are lots of building blocks and pieces. It's a little bit modular almost over time, where you might want to add things which we believe is really, positive. So we're looking forward to your final project plan on this, but definitely supportive of the direction, because as we said before, it's very important to understand what the objective is and understand what you're working towards, because you could easily in a project like this become all things to all people. One of the PIO members said you don't want to have a solution and looking for a problem. You want to know what you want to focus on, and we can certainly see this very much from what you're doing. So thank you for that. Gabriela, we do have a minute or 2 to spare. We have a few little approvals to do now in the public section, but I don't want to close off without just circling back to you to check if there's anything else from your side that you want to raise with us.
Thank you very much, Linda. I think that I would have a lot of things to raise, but I will save your time. I think that these 2 areas of sustainability and farm culture and governance will keep us very busy over the next year, very, very busy. Sustainability will not be done. And it's not because we have Part 4B, it's because we have adoption and implementation, which, if anything, is going to be more challenging than developing the standards, to my view. Our conviction nowadays, in my conviction and our conviction and the conviction of the board, is that we can't just issue standards, publish standards, and then let them to be adopted by their own. That won't happen. We need to work for that. And that part of the work is really challenging for an organization like us, but we will take it seriously, and we need to do it. And farm culture and governance, of course, we have a few other things in parallel, like the CIVs and etc. But we'll see what we decide by the end of the year, but it's not our plan to start immediately with a lot of things in parallel, because we need to focus, we need to stabilize sustainability, and we need to have a great focus on farm culture and governance to make sure that it's going to be a solid, robust, meaningful project. So I think that's it's going to be time for this board to stop before going. And maybe we will have to delay a little bit a few things to make sure that we are not spreading our scarce resources among a lot of projects and temptations, but really focus. And maybe some people will say, well, you're having not that many projects, doesn't matter. Standard setting is not an end in itself. We will do it when and if needed and required by the public interest. And I think that it is my conviction that the public interest now requires us to be very focused on what we have on our plate today. On CIVs, it's in good shape. I think there was some hesitation, some perplexities. You won't see it in the December agenda because we need to be focused on sustainability and give a little bit more time to the working group to take the direction that was given by the board and move forward. So maybe March you'll have something, but they are working in good pace, at a good pace, and I think that finally we understand where we need to go, and there will be some work done on addressing this perceived or real gap in the code about the independence provisions applicable to third parties involved with CIVs, investment funds and pension funds, which we are not sure that are well addressed or completely, fully addressed by the existing provisions. This is the direction that we are taking.
Thank you very much for that. And all I can say then to conclude the session with you and the IESBA, as a IESBA leadership, is good luck. I know there's a final stretch ahead, but it's not necessarily always a downhill stretch. It will probably have a few little hills, but good luck with that. And absolutely supporting your focus that from now to year end, the focus is on getting sustainability out. Thank you very much. I would like to invite the three of you to stay on. We have a short public session to conclude before we close the public session, if I may. I would like to move on then to which is our agenda item number 15, which is the approval of the public session minutes. There was a small edit that I picked up that I just asked Martin to correct, but can I just get check with the board members whether you're comfortable to approve those?
Yep.
Everybody comfortable? Okay, thank you. And then the next point is at a previous session we discussed the nomination process and the appointment in terms of the third cycle. I'm going to hand over to you, Martin, so that we can just do that ratification.
Thank you, Linda. This is just briefly to ratify the decision made at our July board with respect to reappointments and appointments to the IAASB and IESBA. As per our procedure, all those individuals have been informed of their appointment, but we are holding back on a public announcement on that procedure until the final part of our third cycle involving additional outreach for one vacancy is completed. We anticipate that final part of the procedure will be finalized and published by the end of this month or the first days of November, by which time we will then make fully public the names of all of the reappointments and the appointments.
Everybody comfortable with that ratification? Okay, thank you. The next point is just a couple of things for noting. We've got the 2025 PIOB calendar where you can see our proposed meeting dates. We have the meeting dates of the standard setting boards, the SAC, etc. The next step for us will be between Martin and I in the next couple of weeks. We will reach out to you regarding the observations and availability for observations, so that is still to follow, but that's just for noting. Everybody comfortable with those? Okay, and then similarly, we've got the IAASB and IESBA approvals for the rest of this year, as well as the due process status update for noting. And Martin, anything else that we need to deal with under this section? All right. Okay, thank you. That brings us to the end of this public session. So we will stop the recording now, and thank you everybody for your participation. Thank you.